Africa holds a staggering 28% of the total membership in the United Nations and is home to vast natural resources that the world depends on. Yet, isn't it ironic that Africa remains the only region without permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council? The very body responsible for maintaining global peace and security excludes Africa, even though the continent is central to so many of its operations. In 2018 alone, over 70% of the UN's Chapter 7 resolutions focused on Africa. Does this imbalance make sense? And could this injustice finally be corrected? One African leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, has boldly joined the voices demanding Africa's rightful place on the Security Council. But will the global powers listen? How would this shift impact Africa's role in international affairs? Before we dive into these pressing questions, don't forget to subscribe to the African Web and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. When the United Nations was established in October 1945, only 4 African nations were part of the original group: Egypt, Ethiopia, Liberia, and the Union of South Africa. Fast forward to today and all 54 African countries are member states of the UN, yet none hold a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, UNSC. Instead, the most crucial decisions affecting global peace and security are dominated by the 5 permanent members: China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These countries hold veto power, meaning they can block any resolution, even if the majority of the Council is in favor. The question is, how can such a small group of nations continue to dominate decisions that impact the entire world, especially a continent as influential as Africa? Is it time for a change? The disparity becomes even more striking when we look at Africa's contributions. The African continent, united through the African Union (AU), plays an active role in global affairs. Africa is the largest regional group in the UN, comprising 28% of its total membership. Yet the entire continent is represented on the Security Council only through the A3, the 3 elected African nations that rotate every 2 years. But here's the problem: none of these nations have veto power. While they may be present at the table, their voices are often overshadowed by the permanent members, who can push their own interests with little regard for African perspectives. The marginalization of Africa is no accident. It's deeply rooted in the continent's history of exploitation. For over 500 years, Africa has endured systemic injustices that have shaped its current position in global governance. The transatlantic slave trade, for instance, trafficked millions of Africans to build the economies of Europe and the Americas. African scholar Adekunle Adebayo famously noted that Western industrialization was literally built on the backs of African slaves. This painful history continued with colonialism, where European powers carved up Africa at the infamous Berlin Conference in 1884, disregarding ethnic and cultural boundaries, and setting the stage for conflicts that still persist today. But Africa's story is not just one of suffering and exploitation. It's also a story of resilience and contribution. In the modern era, African countries have been at the forefront of global peacekeeping. Countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Ghana are consistently among the top contributors of personnel to UN peacekeeping missions around the world. In fact, over the past 60 years, African nations have sent tens of thousands of peacekeepers to conflict zones, playing a critical role in maintaining international peace and security. Why then is Africa's contribution to global peace not matched by equal representation on the UNSC? This is exactly what Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, alongside other African leaders, is demanding. Traore, who has risen as a bold voice in Africa's struggle for justice, argues that Africa deserves at least 2 permanent seats on the Security Council with full veto power. During the 2019 UN General Assembly, this sentiment was echoed by several prominent African leaders. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking not only as a national leader but also as the then chairperson of the African Union, stressed the urgency of reform, saying, "We repeat our call for greater representation of African countries on the Security Council." Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo went even further, stating that Africa's exclusion from permanent membership is a clear sign that the Security Council is outdated and unfit to handle 21st century challenges. What would permanent seats for Africa mean for the continent and for the world? First, it would give African nations a real voice in decisions that directly impact them. Historically, the Security Council has made decisions on African issues, ranging from peacekeeping missions to sanctions. without much input from the continent itself. For instance, conflicts in countries like Libya, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo have been discussed and resolved by the UNSC without significant African involvement. This has often led to decisions that reflect the interests of foreign powers rather than the needs of African nations. Take the Libyan crisis, for example. During the conflict, several permanent members of the Security Council took opposing sides, with Russia and France backing warlord General Khalifa Haftar, while the United States and China had their own strategic interests. Africa, despite being the region most affected by the crisis, was sidelined in these discussions. Wouldn't it make sense for Africa to have a decisive role in shaping the outcomes of conflicts on its own continent? A permanent seat for Africa would also allow the continent to address broader global issues like climate change, economic inequality, and international trade from a position of strength. With Africa's population expected to reach 2.3 billion by 2045, accounting for 25% of the world's population, the continent will be a crucial player in the global economy. African nations will provide much of the world's workforce and consumer base, driving global economic growth. Shouldn't Africa have a say in shaping the international policies that will govern this future? Moreover, Africa's leadership in peacekeeping missions should be recognized and rewarded with a permanent seat. In recent years, African peace operations, such as those in Somalia and Sudan, have upheld crucial UN norms, including challenging unconstitutional changes in government. African-led peace initiatives have demonstrated the continent's ability to manage its own conflicts effectively, often better than external interventions. Giving Africa a permanent seat on the UNSC would empower the continent to take an even more proactive role in global peace and security. The calls for reform aren't just about fairness. They're about the future of global governance. The world is changing rapidly, with new threats like climate change, pandemics, and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence reshaping the global landscape. The current structure of the UN Security Council, with its outdated Cold War-era dynamics, is ill-equipped to handle these challenges. Reforming the Council to include Africa would make the UN more representative and more legitimate, ensuring that the organization remains relevant in the 21st century. So, what does this mean for Africa and the world? Would granting Africa permanent seats on the Security Council finally bring balance to the global stage? Africa has waited long enough. As the calls for change grow louder, one has to wonder, will Africa finally get its deserved seat at the table? What do you think? Should the global powers listen to leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore and give Africa permanent representation on the UN Security Council? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the African Web for more deep dives into Africa's ongoing quest for justice and development.